The phone wasn't hung up properly. It happens. A clumsy thumb on a touchscreen, a call ended on their side, but not on the device in my hand. A small accident. A pocket dial in reverse. I was sitting in my armchair, the one with the worn leather that smelled of my wife, Eleanor, and her lemon polish, and I was listening to the silence I thought was a finished conversation. Then I heard my son's voice, clear as a bell, not to me, but to his wife, Susan. "He bought it," Mark said, a little puff of air in his voice. The sound of relief. Hook, line, and sinker. Susan's voice was thinner, sharper. "Are you sure, Mark? He didn't ask any questions about the principal? The interest rates you told him?" "Nah. You know Dad. He still thinks a handshake and a man's word are a binding contract. I just told him it was a high-yield investment vehicle, something the bank manager recommended for his retirement portfolio." He just nodded a pause. I heard the clink of ice in a glass. They were at home, probably in their gleaming kitchen with a stainless steel island I'd helped them pay for. "And the fund is fully liquid now?" Susan asked. Her voice was low, conspiratorial. "Transferred this morning. All of it. Enough to cover the seed capital, the first year's lease on the downtown space, and the initial inventory order," Mark said. He sounded proud. He sounded like a man who had just closed a difficult deal. I held the phone to my ear. My own hand felt distant, like it belonged to someone else. It was steady. It didn't tremble. I focused on that. The steadiness of my hand. What if he wants to see a statement? Susan pressed. What if he talks to his actual bank manager? "He won't," Mark said, his voice dripping with a casual certainty that felt like a physical blow. "He never does. He just lets the envelopes pile up on the hall table. I'll just tell him his statements are all digital now, that I'm managing it for him to simplify his life." He loves that word. Simplify. They both laughed. It wasn't a mean laugh. It was worse. It was an easy, dismissive laugh. The kind of laugh you share about a doddering, old relative who keeps telling the same story. The kind of laugh you have at the expense of someone you don't even register as a complete person anymore. Then Susan said the words that broke something deep inside me. Not a shattering break, but a clean, quiet snap like a dry twig under a boot. "It's for the best," she said, her voice softening with false sympathy. "He's just sitting on all that money. He doesn't do anything. He doesn't go anywhere. What's he going to do? Buy another flannel shirt? At least this way, his money is actually building something. A legacy. For us. For Leo, my grandson." Leo. Using his name felt like the final twist of the knife. I heard Mark murmur in agreement. "Exactly. It's better than it rotting in some low-interest account until He trailed off. He didn't have to finish. Until he died. I pressed the red icon on the screen. The connection ended. The silence in my living room rushed back in, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was heavier. It was filled with the words I had just heard. I sat there for a long time. The grandfather clock in the hall, my father's clock, ticked a steady rhythm. Tick, tock. Each sound measured a second of my life that they had already spent. I looked at my hands again. They were still steady, veined and spotted with age, the knuckles thick from a lifetime of work, but steady. That seemed important. I didn't feel anger. Not then. Anger is a hot, messy thing. This was cold. It was a perfect, chilling clarity. It was the feeling of a fog lifting to reveal the sheer, 100-foot drop you've been walking alongside for miles. I've been a resource, a utility, a walking, talking bank account with fond memories attached. Not a father, not a man. I thought about the money. It wasn't a fortune, not by modern standards, but it was my life. It was 50 years of getting up before the sun. It was overtime shifts at the plant, the smell of ozone and hot metal clinging to my clothes when I came home. It was the government pension from 20 years of pushing paper for Uncle Sam after the plant closed. It was Eleanor's life insurance, a pittance she had insisted on, paid for with quarters and dimes saved in a jar. It was the sale of our first small house. It was every skipped vacation, every patched-up pair of boots, every meal cooked at home instead of eaten out. It was my security, my independence. The final wall I had built against the fear of being a burden. And my son had taken it, not with a gun, but with a smile and a lie about a high-yield investment vehicle. I stood up. The worn leather of the chair sighed. I walked into the kitchen. The linoleum was cool under my socks. I didn't turn on the main light, just the small one above the stove. The room was cast in a soft, yellow glow. Methodically, I opened a cupboard. I took out a bag of coffee beans, the dark, oily kind I liked. I measured them into the grinder. The roar of the machine was loud in the quiet house, a furious, temporary noise. It felt decisive. I spooned the grounds into a filter, poured the water, and switched on the coffee maker. As the coffee dripped, filling the kitchen with its rich, dark smell, I made a decision. It wasn't a decision born of rage or a desire for revenge. Revenge is a child's game. This was about balance. It was about correction. It was about reclaiming the quiet dignity of my own life. They thought I didn't do anything. They thought I didn't go anywhere. They thought my life was a waiting room. They were about to find out how wrong they were. The coffee was ready. I poured a cup. Black. I took a sip. It was strong and hot. It tasted like the beginning of a long day's work. I had a lot to do. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm. The sun was just a pale suggestion in the eastern sky. I made my coffee, the same ritual as the night before, but this time it felt different. It wasn't a moment of decision. It was the fuel for action. I sat at the small kitchen table with a notepad and a pen. The pen was a good one, heavy in my hand. I started a list. My handwriting, once a neat, disciplined cursive, was now a blocky, careful print. It took effort. It made me slow down. It made me think. 1. Lawyer. 2. Bank. 3. Property. 3 items. The pillars of my quiet life. The pillars they thought they owned. I knew a lawyer. Not a fancy one. His name was Arthur Davies. He'd handled the probate for a friend of mine from the VFW post a few years back. He was a young man, but he had old eyes. He seemed to understand that for men of my generation, assets weren't just numbers on a page. They were a testament. They were stories. His office was downtown in an old brick building with a slow, rattling elevator. I called him at 9 o'clock sharp. His secretary answered. "Davies Law," she said, her voice professionally cheerful. "I'd like to make an appointment with Mr. Davies," I said. "My name is Frank Miller." "Of course, Mr. Miller. Is it regarding a specific matter?" "Yes," I said. "It's about revising my estate and a few other financial arrangements." She found a slot for me the next day. 2 o'clock. "Will that work for you?" "That will be fine," I said, and hung up. One down. I drew a firm line through the first item on my list. Next, the bank. This was more complicated. Mark was on my main checking account. He'd added himself a few years ago to help pay bills and manage things if anything happens, he'd said. I'd thought it was responsible. I saw now it was just reconnaissance. He'd been watching the flow of money. He knew exactly when my pension checks hit, when the dividends from my old company stock were paid. He knew what he was stealing because I had given him the key to the vault. I didn't drive to my usual branch, the one where they all knew Mark. I drove to the main branch downtown, a large, impersonal building of glass and steel. I walked in and asked for the branch manager. I had to wait, sitting on a stiff couch, listening to the quiet hum of computers and the murmur of financial transactions. The smell was sterile, like new money and disinfectant. A woman in a sharp blue suit came out. "Mr. Miller? I'm Sarah Jenkins. Please come in." Her office was small and tidy. We sat across a polished desk. She smiled, but her eyes were appraising. "How can I help you today?" "I need to make some changes to my accounts," I said. I slid my driver's license and my bank card across the desk. "First, I need to open a new checking and savings account, solely in my name." She typed into her computer. "Of course. And what about your existing accounts?" "I want to close them," I said, "and transfer the entire balance to the new ones." She paused, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. "I see your son, Mark Miller, is a joint holder on these accounts. To close them, will require his signature as well." I had expected that. I'm not closing them today. I clarified. I'm removing myself from them. Let him have what's left. I want to reroute all my direct deposits, my pension, my Social Security, to the new account, effective immediately. Now she understood. A flicker of something, professional curiosity, maybe sympathy, crossed her face. She didn't ask why. I was grateful for that. She just nodded. I could do that. We'll need you to fill out some forms for the next hour. I signed my name over and over again. Each signature felt like taking a step back on a solid ground. When I left, I had a new debit card in my wallet and a book of temporary checks. The old accounts were still there like a ghost limb, but I had severed the arteries. The next time my pension was deposited, it would flow into a place only I could access. I drove home and drew a line through the second item on my list. The third item was the most important. Property. Years ago, with a small inheritance from my parents who had lived through the Depression and never trusted banks, I bought a small commercial building. It wasn't much, a 2-story brick storefront in a part of town that was slowly coming back to life. For 20 years, I'd leased it to a print shop. When the old owner retired, the building sat empty for a while. Mark's new business, a boutique marketing firm he called Synergy Creative, was going to be his masterpiece. He had talked about it for months. He needed a physical office, a place with good bones and street presence. He'd been talking about my building. He hadn't asked. He just started planning, assuming it was his for the taking, probably for a pittance of a lease that would barely cover the property taxes. It was part of his business plan, a business plan funded with my stolen retirement. I went down to my workshop in the basement. The smell of sawdust and old motor oil greeted me like a friend. This was my space. Everything in it was mine, bought with my own money, cared for with my own hands. My tools hung in neat rows on the pegboard. My father's old lathe stood in the corner, covered in a canvas sheet. I had 2 large, rolling tool chests. One was mine, a classic red Craftsman I'd had for 40 years. The other was a newer, black one. I had been filling it, piece by piece, for my grandson, Leo. A set of wrenches for his 16th birthday. A high-quality drill for his high school graduation. The idea was that one day it would be his. A legacy of a different kind. A legacy of knowing how to fix things. But Mark's name was on the business plan. Leo was just the emotional leverage. I walked over to the black chest. I opened the top drawer. Inside, nestled in foam, was a brand new set of socket wrenches, still gleaming. I picked one up. It felt heavy, solid, real. Slowly, deliberately, I took the entire tray of sockets out of the black chest. I walked over to my red chest and found an empty drawer. I laid the tray inside. I went back. Drawer by drawer, I emptied the grandson chest. The screwdrivers, the hammers, the pliers, the measuring tapes. Each tool I had chosen with care. I now moved from his future to my present. It took over an hour. When I was done, the black tool chest was empty. It was just a hollow metal box. It echoed when I closed the final drawer. I looked at my own chest, now overflowing. It felt right. A consolidation. I went back upstairs. I sat at the kitchen table and looked at my list. Only property remained. I thought about Mark's competitor. There was another small marketing firm in town, run by a man named Henderson. I didn't know him personally, but I'd read about him in the local paper. He was an older fellow, closer to my age, who had started his own business after being laid off in his 50s. He was known for being honest and hardworking. His company was growing, and the article mentioned he was looking for a larger office space. I found his company's number online. I looked at the phone for a long time. This was the final step. This was the one that would make a sound. The other actions were silent, preparations for a new reality. This one would send a shockwave. I picked up the phone and dialed. Henderson Digital, this is Dave speaking. My name is Frank Miller, I said, my voice even. I'm the owner of the brick building at 452 Chestnut Street. I'm told you might be in the market for a new office lease. There was a moment of surprised silence on the other end of the line. Mr. Miller, Henderson said, his voice suddenly very interested. Yes, I am. I thought that building was already spoken for. Plans change, I said. Would you be interested in taking a look at it tomorrow morning? The first text came 2 days later. It was from Mark. Dad, my card for the gas station account was declined. Is everything okay? I was in my workshop sanding a piece of maple. The wood was smooth as silk under my fingers. I read the message. I didn't feel a thing. I put the phone down on the workbench, face down, and went back to my sanding. The rhythmic scrape of the sandpaper was the only reply. An hour later, the phone buzzed again. Another text from Mark. Seriously, Dad, call me. The grocery store card was declined too. Susan is getting worried. Worried? That was a good one. I imagined Susan standing at the checkout, her organic kale and artisanal cheese held hostage by a small plastic rectangle that no longer worked. The inconvenience, the public embarrassment, that's what she would be worried about. I picked up the phone. I held my thumb over the message. For a second, I thought about the years of habit, the instinct to fix things, to smooth things over, to be the reliable father who always sorted out the problems. Then I remembered the sound of their laughter. I deleted the message. Not replied. Deleted. It vanished from the screen. It felt clean. The next day, the call started. My phone would ring, and Mark's name would flash on the screen. I would let it ring until it went to voicemail. Then the little notification icon would appear. A few minutes later, another one from Susan. They were a team. I didn't listen to the voicemails. I knew what they would say. A mixture of confusion, then annoyance, then a carefully crafted performance of concern. I just deleted them. The icon would appear. I would swipe it away. It became a new, quiet ritual. I met with Dave Henderson that morning at the Chestnut Street building. He was a man with a firm handshake and eyes that looked at you directly. He was about my age, maybe a few years younger, with graying hair and the tired but hopeful look of a man who bets on himself every day. He loved the building. He walked through it, knocking on walls, looking up at the high tin ceilings. Good bones, he said, echoing Mark's words, but it sounded different coming from him. It sounded like respect, not appropriation. You've kept this place up, Mr. Miller. I believe in maintenance, I said. We stood on the sidewalk afterward, the morning sun on our faces. I heard your son was looking at this space, he said carefully. He was, I said. But his funding didn't come through as he expected. The words were true, just not in the way he thought. I see, Henderson said. He was a decent man. He didn't pry. Well, I'm ready to make you an offer. I'd like to sign a 5-year lease. Standard terms. We can have my lawyer draw up the papers today. I have a lawyer, I said, thinking of Arthur Davies. Let's have him talk. We shook hands. It felt like a real handshake. A contract between two men who understood the value of a thing. When I got home, there were 3 missed calls and 4 new texts. For Mark, Dad, I'm coming over. We need to talk. This isn't funny. From Susan, Frank, your pension check wasn't deposited. We checked the account. We're worried you've been the victim of fraud. Please call us. Fraud. The irony was so thick I could almost taste it. They weren't worried I had been a victim. They were worried their access had been a victim. The cash machine had stopped dispensing cash. I was in the living room, looking out the window, when Mark's car, a sleek German sedan I now knew I had paid for, pulled in my driveway. He got out. He looked angry. He marched up to my front door and tried the handle. It was locked. I had changed the locks the day before. A simple job. Took me 20 minutes. He knocked. A sharp, impatient rap. I didn't move. He knocked again, harder this time. Dad, I know you're in there. Open the door. I stayed in my armchair, the one that smelled of Eleanor. I picked up the newspaper. I began to read an article about the city council debating new zoning laws. The words on the page were calm and orderly. Mark pounded on the door. Dad, what the hell is going on? Are you having some kind of episode? Should I call someone? The threat was clear. Call someone. A doctor. An ambulance. Have me evaluated. The dutiful, concerned son worried about his father's sudden, erratic behavior. My hands, resting on the newspaper, were perfectly still. I was not having an episode. I was having a revelation. My silence was my answer. My silence was the consequence. For years, I had been emotionally invisible to them. Now I was making myself physically invisible too. They had treated me like an empty room, and now they were pounding on its locked door. He eventually gave up. I heard him muttering as he walked back to his car. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. A voicemail. I didn't need to listen to know the tone. I just deleted it. Later that evening, I sat down at my desk and paid my own bills. The electric bill, the water bill, the property tax on my house. I wrote the checks from my new checkbook, signed them with my own name, and put them in stamped envelopes. It was a simple act of self-sufficiency, an act they had tried to simplify away from me. The house was quiet. The only sound was the ticking of my father's clock. Tick, tock. Each second was mine again. I owned it. I had bought it back. A few days of this quiet war passed. A war of attrition fought with silence. The calls became less frequent. The texts turned from demanding to pleading, and then to a wounded, accusatory tone. I don't know what we did to deserve this. Susan texted, "We love you." I read that one twice. Love. A word they used like a crowbar, trying to pry open the door. I deleted it. Then, something different happened. A text from a number I didn't recognize, though I knew who it had to be. "Grandpa? It's Leo. Mom and Dad are freaking out. They said you won't answer your phone. Are you okay?" Leo. My grandson. He was 17. A good kid from what I could see. Quiet, observant. He had my wife's eyes. This was the first time he had ever texted me directly. This was a different calculation. He wasn't them. He was a kid caught in the middle. I thought about the empty tool chest. I thought about the legacy they had tried to steal in his name. I typed back a reply. My thumbs felt clumsy on the small screen. "I'm fine, Leo. Just busy." The reply came back almost instantly. "Okay, good. They're telling everyone you might be sick or something." I didn't think that sounded like you. I stared at that message. I didn't think that sounded like you. He saw me. Even through the fog of his parents' panic and lies, he saw me. He remembered who I was. A kid of 17 had a clearer picture of me than my own son. I wrote back, "Thank you, Leo." The next day, Arthur Davies called. The lease with Henderson was signed. The first month's rent and a security deposit had been wired directly into my new bank account. It was done. The building was no longer an assumed part of Mark's future. It was a functioning asset, my asset, working for me. I looked at the balance in my new account online. It was a healthy number, a number that meant freedom. It was nowhere near what Mark had taken, but it was a start. It was a foundation. Then I called Arthur Davies back. "Arthur," I said, "I need to talk to you about the funds that were taken from my retirement account. I need to know my options. I was wondering when you'd ask about that." "Frank," he said, his voice calm and steady. "There are a few ways we can approach this. It depends on how you want to proceed." I spent the next week in a state of quiet industry. It felt like my old life, my real life. I rose early. I drank my coffee. I went to my workshop. But I wasn't fixing a leaky faucet or patching a piece of drywall in a house. I was building something new. I had found some old plans for a cedar strip canoe. I'd had them for 30 years, always meaning to get to it. It was a complex, beautiful project. It required patience, precision, and a steady hand. It was a project with no purpose other than its own creation. It was for me. The long, thin strips of cedar filled the workshop with a clean, sweet smell. I would measure and cut, my movements slow and deliberate. The world shrank to the space of my workbench. The screaming silence of my phone, the drama unfolding somewhere outside these basement walls, it all faded away. There was only the wood, the glue, and the satisfying curve of the canoe's hull beginning to take shape. During a break, I saw another text from Leo. "Can I come see you?" Not with them, just me. I thought about it for a long time. Letting him in was a risk. It was a breach in the wall I had built. But he was the only one who had asked if I was okay without a financial transaction being declined first. He was the only one who had said, "That didn't sound like you." He deserved an answer. The diner on Elm Street. Saturday, 10 a.m., I texted back. A neutral ground. When I saw him slide into the booth across from me, I was struck by how much of a young man he had become. He was tall and lanky, with a nervous energy his parents' world of smooth surfaces and easy money hadn't managed to sand away. "Hey, Grandpa," he said. He looked uncomfortable. "Leo," I nodded. A waitress came over. I ordered my usual black coffee. Leo asked for a hot chocolate. We sat in silence for a moment after the drinks arrived. He warmed his hands on the mug. "They're going crazy," he finally said, not looking at me. "Mom cries all the time. Dad is just angry. He paces around the house, on his phone, talking to lawyers." I think I took a sip of my coffee. I didn't say anything. This was his story to tell. "Dad said you took his building away from him," Leo said, his voice quiet. He finally looked at me. "He said you leased it to his biggest competitor, just to spite him." "The building is mine, Leo," I said, my voice even. "It was never his. It's a commercial property. I leased it to a reliable tenant who made a good offer, and the money," he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "He said you cut him off from everything. He said his business is going to fail before it even starts." I looked at this boy, this grandson of mine, and I decided he deserved the truth. Not the whole, bitter truth, but a piece of it, the piece that mattered. "Leo, your father came to me a few weeks ago and told me about a special investment. He said it was a sure thing. So I gave him my retirement savings to invest." Leo frowned. "He didn't invest it. He used it to start his company. He told everyone you were his first big investor. His backer." I let that hang in the air. The lie, so easily repeated. "There was no investment, Leo," I said softly. "There was just his business. He took my life savings and told me it was something else. I found out by accident. The things I have done since then, they are not to spite him. They are to protect what is left of what is mine." He stared into his hot chocolate. I could see the gears turning in his head. He was a smart kid. He was connecting the dots. The frantic, self-serving panic of his parents and the quiet, resolute calm of his grandfather. "Oh," he said. It was a small, wounded sound. "They didn't say that, no," I said. "I don't imagine they did." "The tool chest," he said suddenly, looking up at me. "The one you were building for me. Dad always said that was my inheritance. He said you were going to give it to him to hold on to for me." "The tools are in my workshop," I said. "They're safe." He nodded slowly. He understood. It wasn't just about money. It was about everything. It was about ownership. "I'm sorry, Grandpa," he said, and his voice was thick with an emotion that felt genuine. "I'm sorry for what they did." That was it. That was the apology I had never expected to hear. Not from the ones who owed it, but from the one who was caught in the wreckage. "It's not your fault, Leo," I said, and I meant it. "You're a good man." We finished our drinks. I paid the bill. As we were walking out into the bright morning, he stopped. Can I still come see you? At the workshop? I like to see that canoe you're building." I looked at him. This was the bridge. The connection that wasn't about assets or legacies, but about time. About shared knowledge. "The door's open," I said. The final confrontation happened on a Tuesday. I was in the front yard, trimming the hedges. It was a satisfying, mindless task. The sharp snip of the shears, the clean smell of cut leaves. I felt a presence and looked up. It was Mark. He had parked down the street and walked up, as if trying to approach by stealth. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked defeated. His expensive suit was rumpled. There were dark circles under his eyes. "Dad," he said. His voice was hoarse. I kept trimming the hedge. "Snip, snip." "I went to the bank," he said. "The main branch. I talked to them. I know you rerouted your pension." He paused, waiting for me to react. I didn't. I moved down the hedge line. "Snip. I talked to a realtor," he continued, following me. "I know you leased the Chestnut Street building to Dave Henderson. For 5 years, Snip. Snip. My lawyer contacted your lawyer," he said, his voice cracking a little. "He told my guy that you're preparing to file a suit against me for the money. For fraud." I stopped trimming. I turned to look at him. I leaned the shears against the hedge. "Yes," I said. It was the first word I had spoken to him in weeks. He flinched, as if the single word were a slap. "Why?" he asked, his voice pleading. "Why are you doing this, Dad? Why are you trying to ruin me?" "Ruin you," I said, and my own voice was calm. It felt like it was coming from a great distance. "I'm not trying to ruin you, Mark. I'm cleaning up a mess. It's a business. My business, he insisted. I was going to pay you back. With interest. It would have been a better return than you'd get anywhere else. I was building a legacy. For the family. For Leo. The money was not an investment, Mark, I said, and I looked him straight in the eye. It was my retirement fund. It was the money Eleanor and I saved. It was the money for the last years of my life. You didn't ask to borrow it. You tricked me into giving it to you. There is a difference. I was simplifying things for you, he said, throwing his hands up in exasperation. You don't understand this stuff. The market, the returns. I was doing you a favor. And there it was. The foundational belief that I was an incompetent old man who needed to be managed. That his theft was a form of stewardship. I heard you, Mark, I said quietly. He stopped. What? On the phone. With Susan. After you got the money. You didn't hang up all the way. I heard everything. The hook, line, and sinker, the part about me just sitting on the money, waiting to die. I heard you laugh, the color drain from his face. All the fight, all the righteous indignation just evaporated. He looked, for the first time, like a little boy caught with his hand in the cookie jar. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. There's nothing to say, I said, picking up my shears. You made your choices. You thought you were making them in a vacuum, where I couldn't hear. But I heard. And now, I'm making my choices, Dad. I'm sorry, he stammered. The words sounded hollow, panicked. An apology aimed at stopping the consequences, not atoning for the act. No, you're not, I said, and the truth of it was as solid as the ground beneath my feet. You're sorry you got caught. I turned my back on him. I went back to trimming my hedge. Snip, snip, snip. The sound of order. The sound of my world being put right. He stood there for a full minute. I could feel his eyes on my back. Then I heard his footsteps, slow and heavy, walking away. I didn't look up until I heard his car door shut and the engine start. I finished the hedge. It was a perfect straight line. The lawsuit was never about getting the money back. Arthur Davies had been clear about that. Pursuing a case against a family member was messy. And even if we won, collecting from a failed business and a son with a mountain of debt would be nearly impossible. The point of the lawsuit was leverage. A week after my conversation with Mark in the yard, Arthur called me. They're ready to talk, he said. Their lawyer reached out. Mark can't secure any other line of credit with a pending fraud lawsuit against him. He's trapped. What do they want? I asked. I was in the workshop applying a coat of varnish to the canoe. The smell was sharp and clean. They want you to drop the suit. In exchange, Mark will sign a document. A confession of judgment. It's a legal admission that he owes you the full amount. It won't get you the money now, but it will hang over him. If he ever comes into any money, an inheritance, a lottery win, anything, you're first in line to collect an inheritance, I repeated, thinking of my house, my remaining assets. The final irony. We can structure it that way, Arthur said. Furthermore, Susan has agreed to sign a quitclaim deed on your house. I paused my brushstroke. What do you mean? She's not on the deed to my house, not yet, Arthur said, his voice grim. But in this state, if you were to require long-term care and Medicaid had to get involved, they could potentially put a lien on the house to be recovered after your death. Any appreciation in the value of the home during their marriage could be considered a marital asset, which Susan might have a claim to, complicating things. Getting her to waive any and all future claims, however tenuous, makes your estate cleaner. It protects the house. Entirely. It ensures that when you decide who gets the house, there will be no one to contest it. He was a good lawyer. He thought of things I never would have. He's also agreed to be removed from your will. Completely and formally, Arthur finished. So that was the deal. I would drop the public fight. In return, he would legally acknowledge his debt and sever himself from any claim on my future or my past. He was trading his inheritance for a clean slate in the present. It was a desperate, short-sighted bargain. It was perfectly in character. Do it, I said. Draw up the papers. Signing those documents was the quietest, most anticlimactic moment of the whole affair. We weren't even in the same room. Arthur handled it all. I came to his office, signed my name, and left. It was just ink on paper, but it was a wall, a permanent, legally binding wall. A few weeks later, Leo came over. He didn't text first this time. He just showed up, knocking quietly on the door. I let him in. He brought a bag of donuts from the good bakery downtown. He followed me down to the workshop. The canoe was nearly finished. It rested on sawhorses, gleaming under the lights, a thing of beauty and purpose. "Wow," he said, running his hand gently along the polished wood. "You really built this, almost done," I said. We didn't talk about his parents. We talked about the canoe, about the different types of wood, about the way the strips had to be bent just so. I showed him how to apply the final coat of varnish, how to draw the brush in one long, smooth stroke. He listened intently. His hands were clumsy at first, but he was careful. "My dad," he said after a while, his voice low, he sold his car. "And Mom's." I kept my focus on the canoe. "Oh, they're moving to a smaller place, an apartment across town. They have to break the lease on their house," he paused. "The business is gone." He lost everything. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy. I felt a quiet, somber sense of balance. An action, and its equal and opposite reaction. He had gambled with my life savings, and he had lost. The consequences were simply the consequences. "Are you going with him?" I asked. "For now," he said. "I graduate in the spring. I've been looking at a trade school. For carpentry." He looked at me, a shy smile on his face. "Figured I should learn how to make things." "For real," I nodded. I handed him the brush. "Your turn." Long, even strokes, the final piece of the plan was the most difficult. My house. This house. The place I had brought Eleanor home to as a bride. The place I had raised my son. The walls were saturated with memories, good and bad. The scratch on the floor where Mark had crashed his toy truck. The faded spot on the wallpaper where Eleanor had hung our wedding photo. It was too big for me now. The stairs were getting steeper. The yard was getting bigger, and it was full of ghosts. I called a realtor, a nice woman who didn't talk down to me. I told her I wanted to sell, and I told her I was looking for a small, one-bedroom apartment to rent, something on the ground floor with good light. The house sold in a week. The market was hot. The proceeds went directly into my new bank account, joining the rent from the Chestnut Street building. The numbers on the screen were substantial. It was more than what Mark had taken. It was a life reconstituted. My new apartment was clean and anonymous. It smelled of fresh paint and new carpet. There were no memories here, no ghosts. I brought my armchair, my father's clock, my books, and the contents of my red tool chest. I had the canoe moved into a storage unit. I would find a new place to use it. I set up a small corner for a workbench. It wasn't the same as my old workshop, but it was enough. The last thing I did was visit Arthur Davies one more time. "I want to set up a trust," I told him. We spent the afternoon mapping it out. The beneficiary of the trust was Leo. The contents of the trust were everything I had. The house money, the income from the commercial building, my investments, all of it. There was one condition. The trust would pay for his trade school education. It would help him buy a modest home and a truck and the tools to start his own business, should he choose to. But he couldn't touch the principal until he was 30 years old. "And what about the judgment against your son?" Arthur asked. "It stands," I said. "If he ever pays it, the money goes into the trust." For Leo, my new life settled into a rhythm. It was quiet. I woke up, made my coffee, and read the paper. I worked on small projects on my new bench. I took long walks. I met my friends from the VFW for lunch twice a week. I went to the library. I was no longer waiting. I was living. The days were mine. The silence was a comfortable blanket, not a heavy weight. One afternoon, there was a letter in my new mailbox. It was addressed to me in my son's handwriting. He must have gotten the address from Leo. I took it inside. I sat in my armchair. For a moment, I was tempted to throw it away, unopened. Just another piece of the past to be discarded. But curiosity, or perhaps some lingering, vestigial piece of fatherhood, made me open it. It was one page, handwritten. "Dad, I don't know if you'll read this. I don't blame you if you don't. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about hearing me on the phone. I have played that moment over in my head 1,000 times. I told myself it was just a joke. I told myself I didn't mean it. But that's a lie. The worst part is, I think I did mean it. I thought I was smarter than you. I thought you were a problem to be managed. I didn't see you as a person. I just saw you as a resource for my life. I was arrogant, and I was cruel, and I was a thief. I stole your money, but I also stole your trust. I understand that now. I have lost my business, my home, my wife's respect, and my son's. Susan and I are separated. She said she couldn't look at me anymore. She said I had become a person she didn't recognize. Leo barely speaks to me. He looks at me the way you did that day by the hedge, with a kind of calm disappointment that is worse than any anger. Losing the money and the business was devastating. But losing my family and losing you is what has broken me. I know sorry is a useless word. It doesn't fix anything, but I am saying it anyway. I am sorry for everything. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect anything from you ever again. I just wanted you to know that I heard you too. Finally, Mark. I read the letter 3 times. My hands were not shaking. I folded it carefully and placed it on the table next to my chair. I did not feel forgiveness. I did not feel anger. I felt a profound and weary sadness. He had learned his lesson, but the cost had been immense for everyone. I looked out the window of my small apartment. The sun was setting. The sky was turning a soft, bruised purple. My new life was quiet, and it was small, but it was entirely my own. The door to the past was not slammed shut, but it was closed. I was the only one with a key, and I was in no hurry to use it. The quiet was peace. The solitude was dignity. I took a deep breath. It felt clean. It felt steady. It felt whole.